Wednesday class that shall not be named. Again, welcome to everybody to our wonderful Wednesday class that shall not be named. We're here today with some amazing people. On Zoom, we've got Eva and Paul who is listening on, and Jeff and Arlene and Ron and Flossie and Michael and Arnold. Some are on the screen and some are not. We've got lots of viewers on YouTube as well. Now, first of all, February 4th, we're going to be doing both live and online. It is going to be at Paul and Eva's house in Sun City. You don't have to bring any food. We'll have lunch afterwards. She's going to prepare it. If you live in Sun City, you can just come on by. If you don't live in Sun City, please let me know so we can get you a pass. So again, this is for February 4th. It'll be at 10:30. We'll do the class at 10:30, and then we'll have an amazing lunch. If you've never had any of her cooking, it is beyond compare. It's kind of a mixture of Ashkenazic and Sephardic American. It's really fantastic. So that'll be February 4th. We got Lou coming in. Welcome, Lou. So happy to have you here, Lou. So just mentioning that on February 4th, we're going to be meeting in person and online at Eva's and Paul Gellert's house. So if you need a pass, just let us know if you don't live in Sun City. Jeff, where do you live again? Which area do you live in? Oh, you don't want to tell? Okay, no worries. Jeff lives in...
No, I had to get my microphone on. Well, I'm up in Rome, Georgia, most of the time.
All right.
But my daughter, as you know, lives down in Savannah.
Yes.
So we're spending a lot of time in Savannah. And my wife, for those of you, she comes from originally a Savannah family. Her dad was Murray Stein. She's related to the Geffens.
Oh, wow. Okay, I don't think I knew that. I probably did and forgot.
Yeah, so Marla is my wife's first cousin.
Oh, wow. That is
and
a really good first cousin, Marla.
And has other relatives that were part of Mikveh Israel. And as you know, my wife and I are members there too, even though we don't live down there.
We appreciate it. I just wasn't sure which city you lived in. It was Rome. I apologize. I didn't remember that. But so happy to have you here. And today, I'm going to give announcements first. On Friday, we have Rock and Shabbat. Saturday, we do have a bat mitzvah, a wonderful young woman. Make sure sometimes people want to come to bat mitzvah. Some say don't because the service is a little longer. So I thought I'd make, but she's a terrific young woman who is going to be. So Rock and Shabbat is Friday night. And then, of course, we have regular services, but it's about mitzvah. Then coming up, we have the annual meeting on the 25th. So that is at the 1st of February.
Okay.
1st of February. Thank you. You're right. 1st of February, we have the annual meeting. So those are some events coming up. And then remember that we've got Martin Luther King weekend. So some people, I'm sorry, the one I forgot now I remember was the Scholar in Residence. Scholar in Residence is Sherry Rabin is going to be here on Thursday the 22nd. She's going to be at the Learning Center. It's free to just go by. On Friday night, she's going to be speaking here. We have a pre-neg, a services, dinner, and she's going to speak all in one night. You need to pay for the dinner, but everything else is free. She'll speak there about Southern Jews and the Civil War. And then she's going to speak on Saturday, a little bit during services and afterwards. And she's going to be speaking about 20th century Southern Jewish history. So she's has a wonderful new book out. So she's on Thursday, Revolutionary Period in the South. Friday, it's going to be Civil War, Jews in the Civil War. And then Saturday, it's going to be 20th century. And everything is free except for the dinner Friday night. You can still come, just the dinner will charge. Now is what we're going to talk about. Ron, you had a question?
Yeah, I just want to add about Martin Luther King. According to JCL,
the parade will be on that Monday because that's the day is Martin Luther King Day.
So there's a
We don't have to worry about Saturday
right.
parking.
Is there a parade in Bluffton and in Hilton Head? There's a parade in Savannah. The Jewish community is participating in that parade. I assume there's one in Hilton Head and Bluffton, or they may combine one. I'm not sure. So that's something to look forward to. So what we're going to talk about today is, and Flossie's had some great ideas we'll add on later, is we just started the book of Exodus. So I thought we'd talk about the book of Exodus and give a synopsis of the book. Now, for Ollie, I've talked about the actual Exodus from Egypt and all the questions we have because we have no evidence of any of it. But I want to we've just gone from Genesis and now we're entering Exodus, probably the most important book in our history. Obviously, the Bible's holy, the Torah's holy, but if you're going to ask what is the most important book in all of Judaism, it is the book of Exodus. It is the seminal moment in our people's history. We're going to talk a little bit about it from a variety of perspectives: theological, literary, historical, what is provable and what isn't. I'll give you a hint. Nothing's provable. There's no evidence of any of it for the most part. But let's talk a little bit about this book that has become the basis for our entire religion. So as we've talked about, Genesis is a precursor. I still love Lou and her wonderful camera that goes in and out whenever she moves. It's awesome. New computers. It's amazing. I have my camera on my computer. I've had this camera for like maybe 15 to 20 years, and it still works pretty well. I mean, you can see me pretty well. It's a really old camera. I got it, I think, when I was a rabbi in Dallas in 2006 or something. So it's been really, but it's not as good as Lou's.
Yeah.
So Genesis is the precursor. Genesis is God choosing Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It is a story, of course, the creation story, obviously. So it is the precursor. It is, after all these things have happened to the world, God says, I want to have a special relationship with Abraham and Sarah and his family. We're not the only one God has a special relationship, but we are the only one around today who have one going way back. And so we finished Genesis with the death of Joseph. He's brought his family into Egypt. Everything seems to go pretty well. Genesis ends on a high note. Jews are thriving. And in the very first chapter of Exodus, things take a turn for the worse, a dark turn. Because in the first chapter of Exodus, we prepare for what is to come. And what we find in Exodus is the phrase, and a new Pharaoh came into power who did not know Joseph. And this Pharaoh worried about the growing population and enslaved our ancestors, as was predicted in Genesis. So we go into slavery in Exodus chapter 1. Now, again, people like to ask, is there any evidence of this? And the answer is no. You can watch on TV and see all these television shows that show the evidence. There's really no evidence that any of this ever happened. It's faith. It's not surprising, considered we were a slave people, that this would not have been written down by the Egyptians. When did it happen? That is a debate that continues to this day. When did we become slaves in Egypt? What was the period? Because it says 400 years, although scholars think it may be a lot less. One of the theories that is very promising is that at a certain period in time, there was a foreign nation called the Hyksos who took control of Egypt. And this one group of people welcomed outsiders into their administration, which had not been often the case in previous reigns. So you have outsiders who take over, and this could be a period when Joseph could have become a big shot, because Joseph is a follower, is a coming from nothing in a small little provincial area, and now he becomes a very big macher. So how did he become a big macher in Egypt? It's not possible because he's not Egyptian. Well, in the 17th and 16th century, this one group, it's known as the 15th dynasty, took over, and they welcomed non-Egyptians to be in power with them. Once they're overthrown in the mid 16th century, about 1550-ish, that could have been a time where they said anybody who is not Egyptian and is in power, you're done for. And then that is when perhaps they became slaves. So they become slaves under the new regime. We don't know exactly which pharaoh it was who made them into slaves, but it could have been in the 16th century as a guess, following, of course, the Hyksos. Now, there is no evidence at all of us being in Egypt. There is one possible place where there's one word that means travelers that could be a reference to us. But except for that one word, there's almost none. So again, it's all about faith. And it's not surprising it wasn't written down at this time, because Egypt only wrote the good stuff generally. We are kind of the first people that wrote the bad stuff. Like our Bible is about how we misbehave, but you don't see this a lot in other places. So we become slaves in Egypt. The type of slavery is very debated. We know at one point it's very cruel because they start killing newborn male babies because they want to stop us from having kids and growing in population, which is really the least brilliant idea ever. To get rid of the men if you want to stop repopulating the species, as we've seen in China, because if you really don't want to have them increase in number, what do you get rid of?
The women.
Get rid of the women. We see in China. China has nobody there. They're shrinking. They don't have any kids. There's nobody to get married to because they don't have enough women. So, but this is one of the ironies. They get rid of the men, but it leads to the story of Moses, who's put in the basket, raised in the house of Pharaoh. His mother becomes the nursemaid. We don't know how long she nursed for, but he is raised in the seat of power. Does he know he's an Israelite slave? Does he know he's a Hebrew slave? The answer is we don't know. It really doesn't say in the text. If you go into the movies, the more famous ones, the Prince of Egypt and the Ten Commandments, he does not know he is an Israelite or a Hebrew. It is not uncommon for a nursemaid to breastfeed, so that would have probably been very normal, but he knows he's being breastfed by a slave. Did he know he was from the slave, or did he not? Who knows? But what we do know is he kills a slave master, which probably would have been legal for him, but he runs away and he flees. Now, he goes and he becomes a shepherd, most likely a very good one, as I would be. That's really, I was born in the wrong era, because I think I would have been an excellent shepherd, because my allergies are much better if I'm outside.
Would you have wanted to be a shepherd?
No.
Okay.
So, and then he is given revelation when he meets God. God is in the burning bush. Moses is not asked, but told he is going to go back and lead the slaves into freedom. He does not want to do it. He tries to find excuses, but he is then sent to Egypt as God's representative. He had some sort of speech impediment, or maybe he was shy. We don't know exactly. Now, he goes, and what we have to understand is we don't know anything about the Israelites except they were slaves. We don't know how harsh the slavery was until after he comes back. Slavery could have been a much lighter slavery than the connotations we think of. Certainly it got harder after Moses protests, but we don't know how difficult life was. We imagine it was pretty difficult. We don't know what their religion was, if they had kept belief in one God. We don't know what their language was. We assume it was Egyptian. Flossie?
Going back to Joseph, one quick moment. The story or rumor going around that he interpreted a dream and that's how he rose up.
Exactly. So how he rose into power is exactly that. Not only did he interpret Pharaoh's dreams, but he was able to use the knowledge of the future to enrich Egypt. So he basically prophesied or dreamt of 7 years of plenty and 7 fallow years. So 7 good years followed by 7 bad years. So it's like anybody today, if you know the market, if you have a crystal ball and you know what the market's going to do, you are going to make a lot of money because you know when to invest, you know when to take out, and you know when to reinvest. If I know the market's going to fall, I take out my money on high, invest in low. I have never done that personally. I know how to buy high and sell low. That's one of my gifts. And so for 7 years, they are storing grain and storing water and storing everything. And then when things go bad and there's blight and famine and weather issues and starvation and drought, people come to Egypt and they sell it at exorbitant prices, or they trade for land. You want food? You need to give us your land. And you're now a tenant farmer instead of owning your land. So instead of going to war, which we know is very costly, they're able to enlarge their wealth this way. And it is according to Genesis because of Joseph. So this is why. So he's not only able to predict the dream and what's going to happen, but he's able to manage the finances and make Egypt even more powerful. So yes, Jeff.
So also going backwards regarding Moses's knowledge of his heritage, am I correct in remembering that when he has the episode with the taskmaster, there's something about he sees them being brutal to his kinsmen?
Right. Now, that is an excellent point. So he sees them being brutal to his kinsmen. That can be taken in different ways. It can be taken as he knew it was his kinsmen, or telling the reader it's his kinsmen, but he may not know. So, Jeff is being nice to his people, but as the reader, I know it's his people, but he does not know it. He's being nice to his people, and then 2 months later, he finds out it's his people. So it's a very good thing, a great question, because it can be construed in different ways. So he comes back, and he brings the power of God. We know about the 10 plagues, excuse me, and the Israelites are now going to leave Egypt. Now, who are the Israelites and who are the Hebrews? because when we read the text, we see both names being used interchangeably sometimes. So some people believe they are synonyms, that the Hebrews and Israelites are the same people. There are others who debate that. Some who believe the Israelites were people living in what is Israel and the Hebrews were slaves. And when the Hebrews go into Israel, they meld together two different peoples. More often it's thought that the Israelites were the family or descendants of Joseph who did not go into Egypt. So some of the family stayed in Israel and some went into slavery. And when they leave slavery and go back to the land, they reunite with their distant 15th cousins, once removed, twice removed. So that's one of the debates there as to who are the Israelites and who are the Hebrews. Now, as for the slavery, we don't know how bad it was. We don't know how educated they were. We assume that they're not that educated because slaves are generally not. They may have had some rudimentary knowledge, which was necessary for their work, but even in Egypt, most people may not have been literate. Yet the 10 Commandments and the commandments are given in literary form. So when did they start learning? What we do know is that Hebrew is a very old language. It's a very early alphabetic language. It's not the first language with an alphabet, but it's the earliest 5. Phoenician, they think, is the earliest. So it's a very early language. Maybe during this, as old as the Exodus from Egypt, probably even older. And so maybe they were starting to form their own language in Canaan, in Israel. Maybe they were starting to do it in Egypt. However, forming your alphabetic language in Egypt, remember, Egypt wasn't using an alphabet. But the Phoenicians, who were in today's Turkey, and the people in Mesopotamia, the Babylonians and the Sumerians, were using they were using cuneiform. The Egyptians were using hieroglyphics, and the Phoenicians started using an alphabet. So we probably had some sort of trade and saw, hey, the alphabet is better than hieroglyphics because you can say more things and be more specific. And so we know we developed an alphabet pretty early on. There's also been studies that the Israelites were literate going back to the 6th century BCE. So very early on, the various levels, the low levels of society and the high levels were literate very early on. So, but yet the stories about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the Exodus were most likely written down much later. So they are stories that are passed down through the generations and then written down and then maybe edited as well. So again, how much is exactly the case and how much was edited or how much was introduced? What is based on stories? Maybe there was something written which was used as the basis and that has disappeared. The Bible does reference a couple of other books. So these are all questions we don't know about. What we do know is the Bible tells us there's an Exodus and we go into the journey towards Israel, which we know Alu.
No, I'm okay.
So we are now going on a journey to Israel, which is Canaan. And now we're going to be seeing what they call the literary aspects, the themes behind what's going to happen. You have the wilderness theme. We're going to be tested in the wilderness. You have the covenant theme. We're going to have divine connection. We're going to have the exaltation theme, where we start singing hymns about God. So this is what we're going to find in the wilderness. which is an essential part of this period. Why? We spent 40 years in the wilderness. We all know the number. Really 38 years wandering and 38 years in one city, Kadesh Barnea, and a year and a half wandering. It is often given negative connotations what happens in the wilderness, when the opposite is true. Our time in the wilderness was essential. That is when we create our religion. That is when Judaism is formed, not during the time of Abraham, not in slavery, but in the wilderness. Why? Because we're now huddled together in groups, and we're starting to take these laws and make rules for society to exist. And we have to bring people together, because in slavery, we don't know how close everybody was. Because when we know what they go into wilderness, they're living in tribes. So how connected were the tribes when they were in slavery? How connected were the tribes when they were forming the religion? This is all questions. We're not one mesh of people. We're different tribes who are connected loosely by an ancestry. And so in the desert, we have a lot of things. And this is what happens in the book of Exodus, because most of it is going to be narrative and laws. Then we'll go to Leviticus, which is just laws. But we have one major event in the wilderness. But before that, we of course have the miracle of the splitting of the Red Sea. You may have heard about it. It made all the newspapers. We had the 10 plagues. There are those who put a natural spin to the 10 plagues. Solar eclipse, frogs, that happens once in a while. Blight happens once in a while. Locust happens once in a while. Blood could have been some sort of red natural occurrence. The firstborn dying, that one is the one that is very difficult to be natural. So was God using natural ideas to hurt the people, to get the Israelites out? The biggest question is the firstborn. Out of all the things that happened, the firstborn dying is the most remarkable in a sad way. Why is it the most remarkable? Because we've seen frogs, plagues of frogs have happened. We've seen plagues of locusts. Blight is not uncommon, unfortunately. What is impossible throughout history to naturally happen? And that is the death of the firstborn. That is not a natural occurrence. We can have people kill the firstborn for some reason, but the natural death of the firstborn is something human beings cannot even imagine. Think about technology and biology. Can science determine who is a firstborn? No. We can determine it by how they act. My daughter's obviously the firstborn because she's in charge of the house. We had a funny thing happening that it kind of describes my kids' relationship. There's a TV show called Bluey. It's my favorite show for the kids. It's an Australian show with a family and two little girls, the older girl and the younger girl. And the older girl, Bluey, sees her parents squabbling. And she realizes she is starting to squabble with her sister. And she goes to her sister and says, I don't want our parents squabble, and we're not going to squabble anymore. And her little sister says, okay. And Bluey says to her little sister, so from now on, you're just going to have to agree with everything I say, so we won't squabble. And the little sister's like, okay, that makes sense. That's what happens in my house.
Yeah.
So we can't tell these things, but we can tell that the firstborn is a really tragic case because the firstborn has such added meaning. We can understand why that would be so tragic. So we exit, we move to the desert, and we form the religion. Now there are setbacks, obviously. Flossie. Floss.
Was the firstborn, it could be male or female or only male?
Great question. It does not say it. Now, Hebrew is a gender-based language, so everything is gender, from the computer to a human being. Everything has a gender. So in Hebrew, and I think I've said this before, if you have 10 men, it's plural masculine. If you have 10 women, it is plural feminine. If you have 1,000 women and 1 man, it is plural masculine. So plural masculine can mean just men, or it can be men and women. So we don't know if the firstborn was just men or if it was men and women, because it's in the plural masculine. So that's an excellent question. So you see scholars debate it. Most scholars say it is men and women, but it is impossible to really tell, because obviously the firstborn son had greater connotations in that time period. Even in the modern age in countries, the firstborn son but as we know from the Torah and the Bible, the firstborn son is not always the best representative, because in the Bible, almost always the firstborn son is not the one who takes charge. From Abraham to Isaac to Jacob to Joseph to probably Moses to King David to King Solomon, none of them are the firstborn. Moses, we're not sure, but we're pretty sure Miriam obviously was older, but there's a lot of belief that Aaron may have been older as well, but that is not as clear, but certainly the rest. So we go into the desert and we receive revelation. The greatest moment in our history is not the escape across the Red Sea. It is the giving of the commandments. Moses goes up the mountain and we are at the bottom. We are hearing something or feeling something. It is so powerful that the Israelites asked Moses to not let us hear what's going on. It's just too much for us. So they're at the mountain where God is speaking. What does it mean for God to speak? Again, we cannot describe, we cannot describe God in any other terms than what we have, which is language. So to say God speaks is to say God is like humans and uses a voice to speak. We don't know how God communicates. Communicates probably a better word. God communicates the 10 commandments and all the other commandments. So from a traditional perspective, some believe all of the commandments of the Torah were given at Mount Sinai, written down. Others believe they were written down later, but whatever the case is, laws are given. The 10 commandments are written on the tablets. I love to make sure people understand we don't know how they're written on the tablets, because in all edifications of the 10 commandments, you see 5 and 5. You come into our sanctuary, and above the ark we have the 10 commandments, 2 tablets, 5 and 5, right? Well, the first 5 commandments are really long. They take up like 80 or 90%, because the second 5 are don't murder, don't steal, don't lie, don't covet. So the second 5 are really simple, whereas the first ones are believe God, lots extra, honor your parents. So if they were 5 and 5, it would have been a lot on one commandment written really small on one tablet and on the other, or were they on both sides, or were they only on one side? That's also a question. 2 sets of commandments. Obviously, the first one was broken by Moses. The second one is the completed one by Moses. And we have the golden calf, obviously, which is proof that we're not ready for God's plan yet, which leads us to think negatively. How could have our ancestors built a golden calf? How could have Aaron done it? And the answer is they're slaves. We do not know what their belief was in Egypt. Were they praying to Egyptian gods? Probably, but we don't know. So this is a whole new concept. And so what do we have to do now? We have failed as a people with the golden calf. Does God give up on us? Does Moses give up on us? No. We decide we're going to stay in the desert for 40 years, and we're going to develop slowly a religion so that children born into it will be raised in this religion with these ideas, and they will understand it and be born and raised with the ideas. It's kind of like learning languages. It's so much easier to learn a language when you're a child. And this is what we do with religion. They're brought up in the religion, and they have to create symbolic pieces to this religion, because in that world, the idea of a God that does not have form is very difficult to understand. So as we see with the golden calf, it seems like the Israelites need to do something similar to what other peoples are doing. And so we create the sacrificial system. And that is when we take Bezalel, who was an artist. Obviously, if they're slaves, they probably had certain talents that were needed. If they're building stuff, it says they're building Sukkoth and Ramses, the two cities. That means they're going to have talents for building stuff. And so they take Bezalel and are the artists, and they build the tabernacle. Now, what is the tabernacle? And I have a picture here. I will show. The tabernacle is the tent of meeting, where you have the giant tent. Think like a big top circus tent. And inside the tent, there is a veil. There is a cover that divides one section where they're going to put the Ark of the Covenant and the menorah. And on the other side, they'll have a table, and we'll sacrifice there. And this is going to mimic what other peoples do, except we're going to say, we're not feeding God. This is to honor God, because our God doesn't eat food. So it goes in great detail on how to build this beautiful Ark of the Covenant, which we don't know where it is. I mean, it's in a warehouse somewhere in America, we know. But we don't know what happened to it. We do know eventually it's put into the temple. When Solomon builds a temple, they put the ark in it sometime around 940 BCE. And when the temple is destroyed in 586, it is gone. So in that period of 350, 360 years, the tabernacle disappears. A theory that is found in Raiders of the Lost Ark is that when the Egyptians sack Jerusalem during this period, the 9th century, that they take the Ark of the Covenant. Then they let the Israelites live their own lives, but they take it, and then it ends up in Egypt. Others say it ends up eventually going to Ethiopia. And in Ethiopia, they have a temple that they say the Ark of the Covenant is below, buried inside that temple. That's Ethiopia. My personal view is that it's somewhere on eBay.
Yeah.
And that they're bidding right now.
How much are they asking for it?
I think it's like 100 million. You get it right away.
Oh.
Starting bid is like 50 million.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's expensive. It's not
Okay.
ridiculously expensive for somebody who's super wealthy, but for us, it's pretty expensive.
Is that shekels or dollars?
That's probably euros. It's they're trying to
Swiss
be
francs.
yes, yeah, it's right. Swiss francs could be as well. So they build this altar and this tent, and they set everybody around it. So whenever they settle, the tent is in the middle. So everybody is facing the tent. And they don't make Moses the leader of this religion. A lot of people think Moses is the religious leader. He is not the religious leader. He is the civil leader, the secular leader, the governmental leader. He is the president, the prime minister. Because we know the religion is given to his brother Aaron, who is the priest. And they are the ones who are in charge of maintaining the tent of meeting. Now Moses, once it's built, Moses isn't allowed to go in anytime like anybody else. It's now the priests that are responsible for it. They're going to have a cloud during the day and pillars during night. Whenever the cloud lifts, they move. But it's going to be the priests that are in charge of the sacrificial system. They're going to have their own fancy clothes. They're going to have rules for different types of sacrifice. They're also going to do something that is similar to other priests, and that is, it is going to be blood that is important to being part of the sacrificial system in many ways. First of all, when you sacrifice animals, there's blood, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you eat, you're supposed to take away the blood. You don't eat with the blood. But on another level, the priesthood is going to be determined solely by bloodlines. If you're a descendant of Aaron, you have the opportunity to be the high priest or part of the high priestly system, the Kohanim. If you're part of the tribe, with the exception of Moses, you can be one of the lower priests, the Levites. So today, Judaism split into three parts: the Kohanim, the high priests, the Levites, the lower priests, and the Israelites. If you convert, you're an Israelite. If you're from the tribe of Levi, you're a Levite. If you're from the tribe of Levi and you're from the family of Aaron, you're a Cohen. And still to this day, you have Cohens and Levites and Israelites. And as we all know, there's a very specific mathematical way of determining if you're a Cohen or a Levite. And how do you do that? Because I'm a Levite. How do you do it? My daddy told me.
That's right.
That's right. That's how it's done.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a Cohen, it's because your daddy told you.
Mm-hmm.
So the priestly system differs very much from the governmental leader, because Moses is only going to be the leader during his lifetime, and then his sons will not carry on the tradition. It's made very clearly from the beginning that Moses will not be the leader. Now, it changes when we get a king eventually. And certainly on local levels, you always know that the best chance of being a big macher in your community is to be born to a big macher, right? But Moses will not be a leader on that level in terms of that his children will not take the mantle. And they create a whole system around the tabernacle that it is carried everywhere and that you're not allowed to touch it unless you have authorization. That the Levites will be the lower priests, but also the guards. They are the warrior guards. That's how you know I'm a Levite. It's obvious that I'm a warrior descended from great warriors. And the priests are going to be responsible for making sure everybody sacrifices correctly. Unlike other parts of Judaism, the sacrificial system has an intermediary, kind of like a priest in Catholicism. It will go through the priest and then go to God. And so this is the foundations, and the rest of Exodus will deal with the building and the completion of the tabernacle. It ends, the book of Exodus ends with, "For over the tabernacle a cloud of the eternal rested by day, and fire would appear in the cloud by night, in the view of all the house of Israel throughout the journey. So the conclusion of Exodus is we finish the tabernacle, which is the finishing of the religion. We've created the religion now. Now we're going to live in the desert for 40 years and train our children to be able to, of course, take the religion to the next level. And that's why we read that everybody from that generation died, including Moses and Aaron and Miriam, except for 2 people. And that, of course, is Joshua and Caleb. So the whole generation died. Now, other questions about Exodus, we don't know how many people, because the number of people given in the book of Exodus is exorbitant on a level that is just not possible. 600,000 men of fighting age. That really gives the number to millions. And there just wasn't that many people. So a lot of people believe that instead of 600,000, the word 1,000 has changed over time. Like today it means 1,000, but back then it meant unit, 600 units, or 600, whatever a military term is, battalions. So that it's a much smaller number, because the number of, to have millions of people is just not what was possible, because they didn't have that many people back then. We also don't know the route of the Exodus. We don't know where they went. We don't know. We know they went into the Sinai. We know they end up at Kadesh Barnea, which we know where it is. So we know where they were for 38.5 years. We don't know where Mount Sinai is. There's a bunch of options. So they go through the desert and they give us the names, but we don't know the names of the cities and the exact locations. So if you look at a map and you say, oh, that's the map, well, go look online again and you'll find 30 other maps. And most of them have legitimacy. And why is there one Mount Sinai that everybody climbs? It's because not a convent, what's the male version of a convent?
Monastery?
A monastery, thank you. A monastery was put there years ago, and they said this is where it is, and so that's the mountain everybody climbs, because the monastery was there. So we don't know where the mountain is. And that's probably intentional, because we don't want to pray to Moses. We don't want to search for Moses completely. So this is one of the questions we had. We also have other questions as well that we ask. As I mentioned, did we all leave at one time from Egypt, or do we leave in different waves? That is one of the thoughts, that maybe were different waves. It didn't all happen at one time. And we also wonder, what was Moses' relationship with Pharaoh? We ask that all the time. Were they best buddies, as we see in the Prince of Egypt? Were they bitter enemies, as we see in the Ten Commandments? Did they even know each other? For all we know, Pharaoh had many children, and they didn't know each other. What we do know is that the religion was set during this time. Now, when did they leave? What was the date? That is a big debate as well. A lot of people think the Exodus was sometime around 1300 to 1250 BCE. That Ramses was the pharaoh where they left, because they're building the city of Ramses, and that it was his father Akhenaten. Was it father Akhenaten? No, the grandfather, that Akhenaten, who's the father of King Tut, was the pharaoh who, and that's many generations, was the pharaoh who killed the babies. So there's a lot of debate as to who the pharaoh was when they left, because we don't know. We know we have some archaeological evidence that they were there in Canaan in the 12th and 11th century, but we don't know exactly when they got there. So that is the book of Exodus, the most important book, not just because of the story of slavery, but because we form the religion. And we form a religion that is going to be different than other religions. A religion where we believe God loves us and has respect for us, that wants us to behave, that cares for us in a society in which all other peoples had a different point of view than ours. So it must have been very difficult. And that's probably one of the last reasons that they were all together in the desert for 40 years. Because once you go into another place, you start assimilating, you start acculturating, you start marrying people. And so you need to have this strength of conviction, this strength of belief, so that when you go into Canaan and you start living there, which was a much more populated place than the Sinai Desert, you start living there and you're going to be much more in tune with your own beliefs, that you can deal with the onslaught of other beliefs. Yes, Flossie.
How did we get the concept of not seeing God, where idols were all around us? We're the first religion that had you don't see God, correct?
Yes, and that actually comes in Genesis, but really makes a statement in Exodus when they start talking about the cloud and the burning bush and the pillar of fire, that God is an entity that can manifest God's self in different ways. And so, and this is a very difficult concept. It's not a difficult concept for us because a majority of the world has this, believes this now. A majority of the world today believes in a God that doesn't have a form. You take, 2.5 billion Christians, 2 billion Muslims, and then all the atheists, all the agnostics out there, plus you add some Jews, and you've got, 55, 60% of the world believes in this. So it's not so hard for us to believe. But back then, it must have been a very difficult concept because everybody had always been taught that you pray to idols and you feed them, and that God is tied to your land, and that God is your spirit. These gods are, your playthings to these gods. So it's a very difficult concept. We don't really solidify ourselves with this idea for 500, 600 years. It takes hundreds of years and exile out of Israel probably for us to cement it. We get kicked out, the Babylonians take over 587, we go to Babylon and we stay Jewish. And once we get kicked out and we stay Jewish, that is kind of like the symbol of, we're still Jewish. But it's a really interesting book because you see some descriptions of burnt offerings, but they want to be very specific about we get tired of reading about burnt offerings because it sounds ridiculous to us because we don't do burnt offerings anymore. It's just, you know what? I don't mind putting meat on the stove, but it's going in my belly, right? But the burnt offerings are there to differentiate what's going on. This is a sin offering. You're doing this because you sinned. You're not feeding your God. You're doing this as a celebrate. You're doing celebrate. You're doing these are very purposeful sacrifices for reasons beyond I'm feeding my God. Jeff.
I think that invisible God question was a great question because when I hear your answer, I'm going to say I live in basically a totally Christian world, except for the few Jews that are here. And they don't talk about God. They talk about Jesus. So Jesus is pretty easy to understand. What Jesus is confusing as to whether it's a man or God or what, but they've got pictures and statues, and I think that's part of why they've got 1 billion plus people. And I'd say the same about Muslims who have this firm knowledge of Muhammad. But while we have Moses and we don't worship them, and I think these concepts are harder, and I think that's I think that's why it was easier to sell these other religions to billions of people.
It could be. And also at some point we decided we're not going to proselytize. At some point we said everybody has a place in heaven. We're not going to proselytize, whether we did our own or was forced upon us. So for 2,000 years we have not proselytized. And that has kept us small. By and large, we're one of the smallest people in the world. So you're right. Who knows the reasons, but this is where we are. So that's the book of Exodus. There are a lot of great books. There's a book called Exploring Exodus, which is excellent. You can read our commentaries, has a lot of good stuff in there. So it's really a wonderful way of seeing the formation of our religion, really the formation of monotheism. It is written down, whether it was written down hundreds of years later, a few years later, during the time period, we don't know. But it's a pretty impressive book. So that's a little bit of Exodus. We got one more question, Flossie.
When did the Shema come into practice?
So Shema is, of course, a central prayer. It comes from the book of Deuteronomy. And so most likely it was while we're in the desert, but in the last years, because I think it's in the last years, because by the time of Numbers, I think it comes after the time we've already gone and we're getting ready to go into the land of Israel. And it's really an early prayer, because really there's not very many prayers. In the Torah, we have the priestly benediction, which is a prayer. We have the Shema, which is a prayer, and maybe one or two others, but there's not a lot of prayers. Those are often developed later, especially when we add Psalms, there's like songs and prayers. Michael.
Sorry, senior moment.
What's your favorite movie?
My Cousin Vinny.
Okay, so
My Cousin Vinny.
I mean, I was a youth
He
once.
was
I wouldn't have
Jewish.
forgotten.
that is an interesting movie to be your favorite. Okay, so we end it with knowing Michael's favorite movie is My Cousin Vinny. So again, I want to thank all of you for joining us here today. Thank you to those who came on to Zoom, Ron and Flossie and Arlene, Jeff, Lou, Michael, Arnold, and Eva. And there was one other person who's here. So all our best. Again, remember, Rockin' Shabbat is this weekend. We've got a Bat Mitzvah, and then the next weekend we've got our Scholar in Residence. Everything is free except for the Friday night dinner. So look forward to seeing you. And in a couple weeks on February 4th, we're also going to be in Sun City. Don't forget. So thank you for joining us on the Wednesday class that shall not be named, and we will see you next week.
All right, bye.
Bye, everybody.
Take care, everybody.
Shalom, you all.
Shalom, y'all.